In a world where judgment is swift and assumptions are often louder than facts, there stood a man whose silence echoed louder than all the boardroom meetings put together. His name was Elijah Brooks, a name that, to most people in the towering glass building of Alden Technologies, was merely attached to the man who swept floors, polished handrails, and emptied office bins. But Elijah Brooks was more than just a janitor, and the day the engineers failed was the day his truth exploded across the company's corridors. Every morning, Elijah showed up at 5 a.m. sharp. Rain, shine, snow, it didn't matter. He wore the same uniform, pushed the same gray mop bucket, and kept to himself. His face was familiar, his presence consistent, but his voice rarely heard. People didn't stop to talk to him. They walked past him, not out of cruelty, but indifference. They assumed he was just another faceless worker in the background of their corporate symphony. But beneath the humility of his work and the faded patch on his jumpsuit, Elijah carried something few in that company had: genius. On one particular Monday morning, the energy at Alden Technologies was different. There was tension in the air, whispered frustration among the engineers on the 15th floor. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, with the company's new AI product, a multi-million-dollar project that was already overdue. A glitch in the data synchronization algorithm had brought the entire development process to a halt. Meetings were scheduled. Whiteboards were filled and erased again and again. 20 of the company's top engineers gathered inside the conference room labeled Innovation Lab. Each one had credentials, experience, and expertise, yet none of them could find the root of the problem. Hours went by. Coffee cups emptied. Eyes grew heavy. Tempers rose. The engineers debated, diagrammed, and calculated, yet the bug remained. Millions of dollars, a looming deadline, and the future of Alden Technologies' reputation were at stake. And Elijah? He was polishing the brass door handles just outside that very room. He wasn't eavesdropping, but the door was slightly ajar, and the words data bridge crash, asynchronous loop, and deadlock state filtered through the crack. His ears perked up. Not because he was nosy, but because these were words that had once been part of his life. You see, years ago, before his mop bucket became his daily companion, Elijah was a software engineer himself. A brilliant one. He held a degree in computer science and had once led a team at a tech startup. But life, as it often does for many black professionals, hadn't been kind. A false accusation from a jealous colleague had shattered his career. Court battles, legal bills, and character defamation had left him jobless. Though he was found innocent, the damage was done. No one in the industry wanted to touch his resume. Elijah Brooks was a name that sparked suspicion, not respect. He needed to survive. So he picked up the only job that would take him with no questions asked, a janitor. He told himself he'd rebuild slowly. But years passed, and the world forgot what he was capable of. Even Elijah began to believe maybe his time had passed. But now, standing in that hallway, something inside him stirred. He heard the engineers misdiagnose the issue over and over. They were looking at the wrong layer of code. The real flaw was in a legacy integration protocol that hadn't been patched since the project began. Elijah hesitated. He looked down at his uniform. Would they even listen to him? He wiped his hands on a cloth, pushed open the door gently, and stepped into the room. At first, no one noticed him. Then the room fell quiet. 20 engineers turned and stared. "Can I help you?" one of them asked, annoyed. Elijah cleared his throat. I couldn't help it over here. I think the problem's in the API handshake. The legacy protocol is creating a loop that's causing the data thread to fail. You're trying to solve it from the top layer, but the issue is 3 layers deep. Silence. Then laughter, nervous, awkward laughter. A few engineers looked at each other with raised eyebrows. "You're the janitor, right?" Another said, almost incredulously. Elijah nodded slowly. "Yes, but I used to be in your shoes. I worked on systems like this before. I just thought I might be able to help." Someone scoffed. "We've got PhDs here. You think we missed something that obvious." But one younger engineer, Tasha, paused. She looked at Elijah carefully. "Wait," she said. "Let him finish. What do you mean about the legacy protocol?" Elijah stepped closer to the whiteboard. You're syncing modules using real-time input, but your fallback module is outdated. That's where the deadlock is forming. If you patch the legacy API and redirect the fallback into an updated cache queue, the loop should stabilize. Another silence. This time, a thoughtful one. Tasha turned to her laptop. She began typing furiously. Others gathered behind her. Within minutes, she restructured the code as Elijah described. And then it worked. The error disappeared. The loop stabilized. The synchronization completed in seconds. The room exploded, not in chaos, but in awe. How? Who is this man? Tasha looked up, stunned. He's right. It's fixed. No one spoke for a moment. Then the lead engineer, who had doubted Elijah most, stood and said, "Who are you?" "Elijah Brooks," he said simply. "I used to be a software engineer." News of the incident spread like wildfire through the building. Executives were informed. The CEO of Alden Technologies himself came down to meet Elijah. Interviews were scheduled. HR pulled up his employee file and was stunned to find out the janitor had an old resume listing programming credentials none of them had bothered to check. What followed was something Elijah never expected. A formal apology, a public acknowledgement, and an offer, a promotion not engineering assistant or analyst, but to lead systems architect. He'd gone from pushing a mop to leading a team of the very engineers who once doubted him. But Elijah didn't gloat. He remained humble. He accepted the role quietly but with dignity, knowing this wasn't a gift. It was a restoration. His story became more than company gossip. It was broadcasted across the country. News networks picked it up. Think pieces were written. The black janitor who outsmarted engineers and saved a tech giant's flagship project became a symbol, but not just a symbol of genius. The days that followed Elijah's unexpected rise felt surreal to everyone around him. The same co-workers who once walked past him without a second glance were now shaking his hand, asking for advice, smiling nervously in the elevator. HR scrambled to revise his employee profile, update his job title, and arrange a press conference. His mop bucket was replaced with a laptop, his uniform replaced by a sleek company badge and a black tailored suit with his name, Elijah Brooks, embroidered discreetly in silver across the inside pocket. But for Elijah, the attention was never the goal. He walked into the executive offices with the same quiet confidence he carried when pushing a broom. His eyes scanned through the sleek tech setup's high-end glass panels and whiteboards filled with calculations. But he wasn't intimidated. He belonged there. He had always belonged there. Only now. People were finally seeing what had always been true. The CEO, Michael Ashburn, invited Elijah into his office one morning. The man behind Alden Technologies was known for being brilliant, but often cold. This time, he was respectful, if slightly awkward. "Elijah," he began, "what happened last week was remarkable. You didn't just solve a problem. We believe your insights saved the company from losing over $30 million, and probably a few clients." Elijah nodded humbly. "I only did what needed to be done." The CEO leaned forward. "But that's the thing. You weren't supposed to do that. Not because you weren't capable, but because we failed to recognize who you were. That's on us. On me." Elijah stayed silent. Michael continued, "We'd like to elevate you, not just a lead architect. We want you on the Executive Innovation Board. You'd be the first former janitor to ever hold an executive title at this company." The weight of that statement lingered in the air, and Elijah finally spoke. "Titles don't impress me, sir, but impact does. If I'm going to be on your board, I want to make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else here. We need a new way of seeing people, a better system." The CEO was silent, then slowly nodded. "Then let's do it." The promotion wasn't just symbolic. Elijah hit the ground running. He began evaluating code, streamlining systems, and leading brainstorming sessions. But more importantly, he initiated a new internal program, Hidden Talent Initiative, an effort to identify overlooked employees across the company. From security guards to cafeteria workers, he believed talent could come from anywhere. He proved it. It was in one of those meetings that Elijah met Ruth, a middle-aged security guard who had once been a mathematics professor in Ghana before migrating to the U.S. life circumstances, had forced her into low-paying jobs, and like Elijah, no one had looked at her twice. He invited her to a data modeling session. She crushed it. One by one, others came forward. There was Kareem, a warehouse clerk with mechanical engineering background. There was Lila, a mailroom worker with cybersecurity certifications. They had all been dismissed, not by malice, but by assumptions. And that's when Elijah knew this wasn't just about redemption. This was about revolution. But success, especially when it comes from someone who breaks the mold, rarely comes without resistance. Behind the scenes, some weren't thrilled by Elijah's rise. In private meetings, certain board members began to murmur, "He's not from our world. He's shifting focus away from productivity. Is he really qualified, or is this a PR move?" One executive in particular, Wesley Turner, was the most vocal. Turner had been eyeing the same executive board seat for years. He saw Elijah's appointment not as an opportunity, but as an insult. And Turner wasn't just ambitious. He was ruthless. He began digging into Elijah's past, trying to find anything that would discredit him. It didn't take long before he stumbled upon court records. The false accusation from years ago, the case that derailed Elijah's original tech career. Though Elijah had been cleared of all charges, Turner saw it as a weapon. A few days later, during a confidential board meeting, Turner brought it up. "I believe," he said, feigning concern, "that we should be transparent about our leadership. One of our newest executives has a legal history that I think the shareholders might want to know about." Gasps echoed in the room. Whispers followed. Elijah was summoned to the board. When confronted, Elijah didn't flinch. He calmly laid out the entire story, how a co-worker had framed him for sabotage, how the court had cleared him, and how that event had cost him everything. "The irony," he said, "is that you now benefit from the brilliance that system nearly buried." The room went quiet, and then Tasha, the young engineer who had first believed in him, stood up. "I don't care what the court files say. I was there when he solved what 20 of us couldn't. If that's not leadership, I don't know what is." Others nodded. Turner was silenced, and Elijah's place on the board was solidified, not by pity or spin, but by respect. But Elijah wasn't done. He reached out to the community, started speaking at colleges, launched mentorship programs for formerly incarcerated black men who had been denied second chances. He became more than a tech executive. He became a beacon. He told his story in front of hundreds. And every time, the room fell silent when he said, "I swept floors with a degree in my back pocket. I smiled at people who never saw me. And I kept going, not because I believed they'd change, but because I refused to forget who I was." His story began trending nationwide. Social justice platforms picked it up. News anchors debated the racial and classist implications. Hashtags exploded across social media. Hashtag from mop to mastermind. Hashtag Elijah Brooks effect. Hashtag genius in uniform. People across the country began sharing their own stories. Janitors with dreams, cooks with degrees, security guards with talents that had gone unseen. Elijah had unknowingly become a voice for the voiceless, a symbol of all those forced into invisibility. And it didn't stop there. A documentary crew approached him. A film was in the works. Universities wanted to bring him on as a guest lecturer. Some even offered honorary degrees. But Elijah never let it swell his head. He still visited the janitorial staff every morning, still kept a photo of his old uniform in his office as a reminder, still mentored new hires personally, because he knew what others forgot. Genius isn't defined by appearance, wealth, or title. It's defined by courage, consistency, and character. He knew how many people still judged others by their uniforms, by the work they were forced into, not the work they were capable of. And that's why Elijah fought harder. Because he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for the next Elijah, who might still be holding a mop in silence. Elijah Brooks had become a legend, but he hadn't set out to be one. He didn't crave fame. What he sought was dignity. For himself, for others like him, and for the millions of people who had been told, directly or indirectly, that they were less simply because of where they stood in the building. His promotion within Alden Technologies had sparked change, yes, but had also triggered a reckoning. Employees who had long felt unseen were now speaking up. Whispered stories became shared truths. Hidden resumes came to the surface. The Hidden Talent Initiative, which Elijah had launched with little more than a whiteboard and a belief in second chances, had grown. The company formally embedded it into their HR structure, naming Elijah the director of a newly created department, Equity in Excellence. His goal wasn't just to recruit brilliant minds, but to recognize the brilliance already present in unlikely places. One day, Elijah was approached by a young man named Darius who had been working in the building's mailroom for 3 years. Darius handed Elijah a worn folder containing drawings, complex circuit diagrams, and prototype sketches. "I didn't know who else to show this to," Darius said, almost ashamed. "People just think I'm here to deliver packages." Elijah smiled. "That's exactly what they thought about me." He sat with Darius, reviewed the sketches, and immediately saw the potential. Within a month, Darius was moved to the company's hardware prototyping team. A year later, he filed his first patent under Alden Technologies. Elijah's quiet revolution was taking hold, and it was bigger than anyone imagined. But every revolution, no matter how just, invites resistance. Turner, the executive who had tried to undermine Elijah before, had not stopped plotting. With growing resentment, he watched as Elijah's influence expanded beyond the company. The media was calling Elijah the tech underdog who changed the game. Colleges were quoting him in lectures. And most importantly, the board was now listening to more than they listened to Turner. Turner's ambition turned bitter. He started whispering again, this time not about Elijah's past, but about his present. He accused Elijah of favoritism, of lowering standards in recruitment, of using his story for personal gain. He even attempted to rally a group of disgruntled executives to call for Elijah's removal under guise of preserving meritocracy. But Elijah wasn't shaken. He responded the way he always had, with clarity, with facts, and with integrity. In an internal memo leaked to the press, Elijah wrote, "True meritocracy doesn't exist when talent is only recognized in those who look the part. If excellence is truly our standard, then we must be willing to look beyond suits and titles to the ones with dirt on their hands and brilliance in their minds." The memo went viral. Turner was eventually confronted by the board for orchestrating a smear campaign. The irony was brutal. His own underhanded tactics had discredited him. He was removed quietly. And Elijah? He only became stronger. But the world outside Alden was calling. News outlets began requesting interviews. One by one, Elijah accepted. Not because he wanted attention, but because he saw a rare opportunity to shift the national conversation. He appeared on panels discussing racial bias in corporate hiring. He gave a TED Talk titled, "The Janitor's Code, What We Miss When We Judge by the Job." He met with lawmakers to propose policies around hiring transparency, unconscious bias training, and second-chance employment programs. His voice echoed beyond boardrooms, into Congress, into college classrooms, into everyday living rooms. But amid the success, Elijah never forgot where he came from. He still woke up at 5 a.m. just out of habit. He still kept his old janitor badge in his wallet. He still met monthly with the building's custodial staff, sitting with them over coffee, asking how they were doing. He knew that the moment he forgot what it meant to be invisible, he'd lose the very thing that made him powerful. One evening, during a company gala honoring innovation, Elijah was invited to the stage to receive the company's highest award, the Ashburn Medal for Leadership and Vision. As he stood before the crowd in his black suit, applause echoing around him, Elijah took a deep breath and began his speech. "I wasn't supposed to be here," he said. "Not because I wasn't capable, but because I wasn't seen." He paused, scanning the crowd. There are millions of Elijahs in this world. People mopping floors, stacking shelves, driving buses. People with ideas, dreams, knowledge. They don't wear the right clothes. They don't have the right contacts. But they've got genius in them. And we ignore them at our own loss. The room fell into silence, profound, uncomfortable silence. And then, thunderous applause. That speech, recorded and shared across social media, sparked a national movement. Companies began reviewing their internal hierarchies. HR departments reevaluated how they hired, how they promoted, how they treated staff who weren't client-facing. And more importantly, people began looking at each other differently. Elijah had become more than a symbol. He was now a catalyst. But even a catalyst must face hard truths. Months later, Elijah received a letter from the man who had once falsely accused him years ago, the man who had ruined his first tech career. The letter was brief. "I see now what I destroyed. I'm sorry. I hope one day you can forgive me." Elijah sat with that letter for hours. Rage didn't rise in him, nor did joy, just peace, because he no longer needed the apology to move forward. He had already moved forward, not through vengeance, but through victory. And with every janitor promoted, every cafeteria worker given a second chance, every gate broken, he rewrote not just his own story, but the stories of countless others who had been waiting, watching, hoping. The story of Elijah Brooks had now traveled far beyond the tech world. His name became a case study in business schools. His face showed up on magazine covers. His TED Talk reached over 10 million views within weeks. Yet, for all the cameras, accolades, and applause, Elijah's transformation never changed core of who he was. Every day, he returned to the company, not just as a figurehead, but as a force. His presence in executive meetings brought balance. His voice challenged the usual echo chambers of privilege. And perhaps most importantly, he kept asking the question that others were afraid to. Who else are we missing? His question wasn't rhetorical. It was a mission. He began touring every department, speaking one-on-one with people often ignored by upper management. He walked through the warehouse floors, the delivery docks, the basement data centers. In each corner of the company, he uncovered more stories of brilliance locked behind stereotypes. One afternoon, he visited the server maintenance wing, cold, dim, and quiet. That's where he met Yvonne, a Nigerian immigrant who had been silently solving IT anomalies for years without formal recognition. She had a degree in network engineering from back home, but had been stuck in the same role since she was hired. Elijah reviewed her logs and saw the pattern. She had resolved more red flag tickets than the entire Tier 2 team combined. Within a week, she was promoted to a senior systems position. Each week brought a new victory, not just for Elijah, but for people who had long been denied their rightful place. He understood that the true power of his position wasn't the salary, the title, or the attention. It was access. Access to resources, to decision-making, and to the authority to elevate others. But not everyone applauded the changes. Some longtime employees resented the shift in culture. They complained of lower standards and reverse discrimination. Anonymous letters were sent aboard, accusing Elijah of creating division. Elijah didn't ignore it. He confronted it head-on. At an all-hands meeting, he stood before hundreds of employees and said plainly, "If fairness feels like oppression to you, then maybe you were benefiting from someone else's silence. Maybe your ceiling was built on somebody else's floor." Silence again. But truth doesn't ask for comfort. It demands acknowledgement. The room remained quiet. And then a slow clap started in the back, followed by another, and another. Soon the room erupted. Despite resistance, Elijah pressed forward. In time, Alderton Technologies became known not just for innovation in hardware and software, but for innovation in people strategy. Other companies began copying their hidden talent initiative. Elijah was invited to consult for Fortune 100 firms. His methods became a framework. But still, he never left Alderton. It wasn't just his workplace anymore. It was his battleground, his blueprint, and his base of impact. Eventually, the company's board of directors made a bold move. They offered Elijah the role of Chief Visionary Officer, a brand new executive title with one mission: to ensure no talent, no matter how hidden or humble, would ever go unseen again. The offer stunned even Elijah. He accepted, but with one condition. "I want the janitor's closet turned into an idea lab," he said. "Same location, same door, but instead of mops, it'll have whiteboards, computers, coffee, and anyone, no matter what floor they work on, can come there and solve problems." The board agreed. It became known as the ground floor lab. And it worked. Once, During a particularly complex product issue that stumped the R&D division, a cafeteria chef named Miguel entered the lab during his break. He watched the diagrams on the board, asked a few questions, and then casually suggested materials workaround based on his knowledge of heat conduction in industrial ovens. That workaround saved the company $1.2 million. Miguel was moved into product design immediately. Elijah had proven, again and again, that brilliance isn't always dressed in a suit or sitting behind a desk. But his work wasn't limited to corporate walls. He took his story into prisons, speaking to incarcerated men about rebuilding their lives, about reclaiming lost potential. He launched a foundation, Keys to the Closet, aimed at funding education and reentry programs for formerly incarcerated people trying to break into the workforce. His message was simple: don't wait to be seen. Be ready for the moment they finally look. But even with all this success, Elijah faced another challenge, one that was deeply personal. His estranged father, who had abandoned the family when Elijah was just a child, resurfaced after hearing about his son's rise to prominence. He reached out through a letter, simple, shaky handwriting. I see you. I'm proud of you. I wasn't there when I should have been. But if there's a way, I'd like to know the man you became. Elijah took weeks to respond. Memories of abandonment and pain lingered. But one evening, he penned a reply. I became a man because I had no choice. I found strength in silence. I learned to sweep away more than dust. I swept away doubt, anger, and fear. I don't know what kind of relationship we can build now, but I'm open to finding out. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was a step, just like every step Elijah had taken before. From the janitor's closet to the boardroom, from invisible to indispensable. He hadn't just changed the company. He changed the conversation. About race, about class, about recognition, about how many hidden geniuses are passed by every day because we've trained our eyes to only look up, not around. And as Elijah stood on yet another stage, receiving yet another award, he ended his speech not with a quote, but with a question. Who's mopping your floors right now? And what would happen if you asked them what they think? Like my video and subscribe my channel for more daily videos.